Hey folks, welcome back. This is the random drop that I hinted at in my tarot loot video if you watched it. And this is a snippet from Patreon. Now I wanted to do little, just really micro 1 minute drops of this on Reels and YouTube Shorts, which I probably still will do, but I thought it would be fun to more officially introduce my Animals in Tarot series because it's one that's been incredibly popular with my Patreons. I will add, it was really hard to select which one, but before we get into that, this is going to be a preamble and then it's going to flick to an entirely different video and you are going to see Patreon exclusive content. You are not going to see all of it. It is just a snippet. There is a lot of stuff that I do over on Patreon and it traverses all of my worlds. And so what I mean by that is I do a lot of animal work, which I call animal gnosis. Please check out my animal gnosis video for explanation if you don't know what that is, because that in itself is a variation of many things. I'm of course a tarot reader amongst other forms of divination, so that's a key part. I am a practicing witch. So anything from the influences in my witchcraft, such as animism and spirit work and deathcraft, some of the pagan influences, the folklore that I incorporate, there's a lot of that over there. And then of course, as a therapist, I have some inclusions of therapeutic offerings, things that are accessible to everyone, ways to bring it into the other practices, different psychological discussions around terms and concepts sometimes, and things like that interwoven into, you know, a decent portion of what I do. So it's kind of a mishmash of all the things that make up me, my practice and my training. That said, hopefully it makes sense why Animals in Tarot became a thing. A lot of people really have enjoyed Animal Gnosis and the monthly reading that contains anything from a divinatory message to educational information, sometimes some folklore inclusions, and it's all kind of mixed into one for the divinatory message. But then you get into Animals in Tarot, and for a fair amount of people that's more challenging. I spend all the time in the world studying animals, so that's why I know what I know, predominantly self-taught or through people who are far more knowledgeable than myself, who work in fields like zoology. And then of course the witchy, magical, folkloric, cultural influences as well. What happens with animal tarot decks is that if people want more than one and an animal shows up in different cards, sometimes that's quite challenging for people. At other points, it's just that people are not sure how to place the animal in that card in particular. And thus, Animals in Tarot was born as a series on Patreon. How I approach each discussion can have its nuances. I don't discuss all of the things for every single one because, my gosh, I basically pick an animal based on our animal gnosis. Say I picked fox, because I've got fox in front of me at the moment. So say I picked fox, I then go through as many animal decks as I can muster, or at least until I get to a certain point, and I look at where fox is repeated throughout different decks, where it might take up a whole suit or take up a court family, you know, the elements and things that it's associated with, if that's the case, or what individual cards it comes up in the different decks. And through the series, the video goes through each card and I explore both the things that we know about fox as a whole and how that might be relevant to that particular card, and then also all of the nuances that help it make sense to be in so many different cards, because animals, just like ourselves, are very nuanced, are multifaceted. They might be seen commonly through the human lens in one way, but actually there's lots of things that they have in common, there's lots of things that they don't. Even species to species in the same branch of animal family can have quite a few variations, and so even those nuances can make a difference. In one deck, you might be seeing a red fox and the climate that they live in is entirely different to that of an Arctic fox. So I like to really pull in the context. What suit is it in? Is it a minor? Is it a major? Is it a 𝗏? What is the significance? And then how does perhaps the folklore or the more educational behavioural studies of this animal and what we observe make sense for it in that particular card? Not all animal decks are made like that, so I don't always include those ones, but hopefully you're kind of getting the idea here. So we really get into it, and each one's a little bit different. If there's not too many tarot cards, I usually add a few oracle in at the end, always oracle that have some sort of keyword or phrase on them. And then we can also do like a similar thing. And it's hopefully a really helpful way to introduce people to a particular animal in the tarot context and see how the fox might show up in the magician, but it might also make sense in the Eight of Wands. And we get to have some really fun discussions as well, like why is the bat always the Hanged Man? I mean, it's not always, but sometimes we get these very familiar repeats of animals in certain cards, and we can talk about how that happens, why it happens, where it makes sense, perhaps where it might not, where it misses a bit. And then we get to look at the few decks, if any, that haven't gone for that more familiar representation and why they've done it differently. There's really a lot to get into with animals in tarot, and so it's been just an absolute delight for me, selfishly, and been therefore really great that everyone's been so excited and just love the series so much. I know that was a long preamble, but it was very much needed to give you just a bit of a taster, because all I'm going to do now is I have selected one card for you and I will insert the part of the video where I explore that particular card. Now remember, it's not going to hit all of the areas because these videos are usually about 45 minutes to an hour long. They usually have, I don't know, at least 8 depictions in them of the animal in a tarot deck. I'm sure I'll get to an animal where there's perhaps only 3, but they're quite lengthy videos. And so what I pick out from one card might be entirely different for another. So just remember that. I'm sure that there's loads that you could add to it, of course. And yeah, I just hope you enjoy this little peek into a behind the scenes and some of my Patreon offerings. So we stay with the Pentacle suit, but we move up quite a bit numerologically. And we are now in the 8 of Pentacles. We have got the 𝗺cie Tarot and the Brady Tarot, both indie decks. Look at the freaking detailing. In fact, there's really gorgeous detailing on both of these, but in different ways. And here you can actually see we've got some bees who do a lot of stuff underground as well, which is a lovely nuance that I am pretty sure Emmy Brady talks about in the book. So yeah, I really love that. Quite different depictions, considering here we've got a grouping, whereas here we've got the solo focused in bee. The 𝗺cie Tarot does really like to focus in on one symbol, and I really love that about it. It also, I suppose, seconds as an oracle for those who perhaps might struggle with the tarot infusion, although I do love it. It's a very fun deck for me to use, but that's kind of besides the point. When I think about moving from the 3, the 8 really represents quite an expansion from this, and it symbolises the bee's mastery and discipline of their particular craft, as it were. So the thing is here, though, is that bees continue to work diligently until the end of their lives, and they demonstrate remarkable tenacity when it comes to this. Like, honestly, I really have seen some very old, very worn, tired bees still just going about their business, because that is what they are living and breathing for. And the thing is, whilst bees are often thought of as single-minded, but in a way that has kind of been a little bit reductive, I suppose, in the way that they've been spoken about in the past, observations recently, and further studies on them reveals their complex problem-solving abilities and the potential emotional processing factors that support this, which is just really, really fascinating in and of itself, because there's such an assumption that we know as humans, or that we have such a greater way of functioning and expressing and knowing and all of these abilities that animals just don't have. And I just don't think that that's necessarily the case. Of course, they don't think like us, but arguably no one animal thinks the same as another species anyway. So who are we to define it? We can define it in this way in terms of interest and curiosity and observation, but it's very different from actually knowing, if that makes sense. But anyway, I feel like the bees here and the energy is to remind us not to stop just because we've reached a certain level of capacity. And also, it's really not about ascending, but putting our growth or study and our abilities into that continued action, like we see. That's the discipline. And perhaps finding a pace that serves more longevity and learning from those past experiences with physical burnout or procrastination, or just things showing up in our body or things showing up in our environment that just haven't worked for that. Because the bees aren't seeking perfection, you know, really they're just embodying their dedication to their work, and that is their active expression of it. And the thing is, they have changes to their pace and other parts of their life, and eventually an end to that cycle as well. But there is a level of dedication here that is paramount. And I mean, they have skills that we still don't fully understand. And this has led to amazing workarounds and really ingenuitive creations that still amaze so many who study them to this day. Some of the ways that they create safe spaces for nesting, I'm not sure if that's the correct term, but especially solitary bees, and the way that they move around material that is far larger than them, again, is just so impressive. And so the idea of mastery but not perfection, not ascension, just mastery, and finally getting to a place where you know your shit, you are good at it. It doesn't make you perfect. It doesn't necessarily make you the best. It doesn't mean there's not more to learn. It also doesn't mean that we stop. I really love bees for this one in particular. I think that it's possibly my favourite of all of them, if I'm honest. Here we have the Forest Law Tarot out of print, Animal Totem Tarot, mass market imprint, indie deck, and then the Victorian Fairies Tarot, which was mass market out of print, and then it was indie kickstarted, and now I don't know. 4 of Pentacles in all of them, although the really interesting part is in the Victorian Fairies, we actually have the Fae holding on to the chestnut, hoarding the resources here, and the squirrel's like, hey, this is this is my main diet, dude. Something needs to change here. Very Rider-Waite-Smith depiction. These two decks, whilst I feel like they are very Rider-Waite-Smith leaning, a bit more open to interpretation, it does not surprise me that the squirrel is in this card at all, though. So I suppose I should talk a little bit about the Pentacles suit quickly. I see the Pentacles with the physical realm, you know, our embodied existence, our material realm, so not just the financial one. So it can be financial, I guess, of course, but it extends into like all areas of, I suppose, work and labour and activity and resources and environment and body physicality, the spectrum from abundance to scarcity, that kind of existence, and how we cultivate through this. That's just a very brief introduction to the Pentacles as the way that I see it. I could actually see them in the wand suit in terms of like feisty personality, creative ways of being resourceful, but predominantly Pentacles suit Earth. It makes sense then, because if we look at the materials they make nests for, how they make nests, they dig and bury their food. You know, the things that they eat are like tree seeds, so chestnuts, walnuts, hazelnuts, acorns, etc. I think that sometimes the red squirrels eat smaller tree seeds as well, but I don't know if that was a natural progression over here or whether they've sort of been forced to. They also have been known to eat flowers and fungi and I think occasionally like other plants, insects, and then there's some discussion about bird eggs and nestlings. At this stage, we'll be looking into that a little bit more, but there's some of the food sources. The thing is with squirrels, and we'll get into this in another part of the discussion, is over here we've got the red and the grey, but it's the red that's native and they are endangered. But anyway, getting off topic. For now, we have the 3 squirrels. And then the 4 here, it really depends on how much they're playing with the 𝗪𝗿𝗁𝗀 or whether we're leaning a little bit more into the numerology of things and then the element. I like both, as people know, so we're just going to roll with a bit of both and say that for the 4, especially when I consider the structure of the 4 and the foundation being in its sort of first iteration of stability, and we have that mix of like a desire to protect our foundation, and in this instance our resources and our materials, and that can go one of 2 ways. You know, we can really feed into that in a healthy capacity, or we can perhaps be kind of over-invested, worried about losing it, become fearful, become quite tight-reined with it, not very sharing, and that kind of thing that we often see more expressed, I feel like, in the 𝗪𝗿𝗁𝗀. So it has that a bit of a nod to like greed and maybe hoarding resources. Both ends of this spectrum really speak to squirrel behaviour, because squirrels, the way that they prepare for the coming cold seasons, because they don't hibernate, but obviously things slow down in winter and their food sources become extremely scarce, they actually squirrel away, as we would refer to it. They bury their food, and they bury as much food as possible. Obviously they're still eating food, but they are very known for going and putting their resources, their food, into the ground in various different spots so that they're prepared for winter, so that they don't need to hibernate, because that's not what they do, and that when they need those reserves, when they need to call upon that foundation, and when things slow down and there's less coming in, it sort of stabilizes that in and out flow still, if that makes sense. And if we think about it, even when they're really busy doing all of this, they are preparing for this space, they're preparing for this, so they're sort of always managing the 4 of Pentacles element, because they're either preparing for it or they're living from that resource that they have prepared and preserved. And that is that relationship with stability, control, that structure of managing the 4 seasons and their availability for food during that time. So I see this as the squirrels doing that. That's definitely like what they devote their energy and their attention and their time. When it comes to winter, then they can go and squirrel about and try and find them. And the interesting thing is they don't find all of them as well, which this could be a really good representation of that. I'm not sure if you can see, but we've got one of the pentacles here, which is clearly a seed, has broken open and it's starting to sprout. And with squirrels, because they don't find all of their food resources, it's actually really good for us and the earth and other squirrels to come in the future, because there's always the potential that what they've buried will grow into another tree. And so that's how part of that, again, that almost that cycle of 4. I know it sounds weird to say when we think of 4 as like a cycle, but the stability is retained in the ecosystem when everything can do its part, and that you know, those steps are able to continue taking place. I also like it because the squirrels then are very seasonably changeable, and whilst it seems from a distance that they're doing the same thing a lot of the time, I do think of the 4 seasons and how they exist in each of them just a little bit differently. So that's kind of fun for the 4 as well. Now, you could even make the argument, if you're a Риder-Waite-Smith person in particular, that if you want to lean into the consideration, or we're working with reversals or whatever it is, or blockages, and if you're considering, like, am I hoarding resources? Am I perhaps a stalemate because I've got so much stuff, or whatever it is, like someone else could benefit from that? We can still see that in squirrel behaviour as well. We're going to get into the red and grey situation a little bit more in a minute, but essentially they take more than they need. Now, there are many good reasons for that as well, but also they're in competition for food with each other, the red and the grey over here. And because I didn't sort of introduce this, I tend to let you know that I'm working with a particular sort of subset of species, or at least that I'm working from what's familiar to me and what I've learned. I think that's enough for the 4, so let's keep this one out and we will get into the discussion between the grey and the red. I realised it might probably be good to add a little goodbye section to this. I hope you enjoyed that taster. Let me know what you think. And yeah, I'll hopefully see you all again soon when we're fully moved and my room and recording stuff is all situated and set up again. But until then, bye for now.